So we're just looking at the Caterpillar procedure in the manual here for testing the travel motor case drain on this machine. They've got a procedure where they give you some part numbers for fittings, etc. And then they're telling you to pin the track and block it for the motor that you're testing. Then they have you take the, obviously you can take the motor cover off to get to the motor. Then they have you take the case drain line that normally connects here and takes case drain back up through the swivel back to the tank. They have you take that off, put a plug in the end of it, and then the case drain fitting on the motor, you run a hose out to a drain pan, and then while testing against the, stalling against the pin track, you're going to measure case drain out here and just watch it fill the pan and measure the quantity over time, which is okay. I've done this test on this excavator and others. The issue I have, and they address this in some other Caterpillar excavator service manuals, you're only pinning the motor into one position. So the motor isn't rotating while you're doing this test. So if you've got one bad piston or two bad pistons, and they happen to be away from the port, the port plate port where you're sending your high pressure oil, well then you're not going to see any issue here. So you have to keep unpinning the track and rotating it and pinning it in all different positions if you want to do this test with any level of accuracy. So I don't. It's also there's parts of the motor that need to seal while it's rotating, like the barrel to port plate surface, the slippers while they're sliding on the swash plate itself. So I'm not in love with this procedure. So years ago, this particular machine had a travel power issue. So we wanted to test the case drain. We did that method. It didn't show anything particularly alarming. But then I thought, as a much easier process, what we could do is just take the case drain line coming out of the swivel that carries the case drain up from the two travel motors towards the tank, and we put a flow meter in there. And at that time I put a quick connector in. The quick connector's still in here. So I'm going to put the flow meter in here and just see what we see. With this type of test, we're going to measure, we can drive around the yard. We can actually drive uphill and see, what type of case drain flow we get. We can compare the left track to the right track drive. We can compare those two, of course. The only issue with this, where this kind of is a better test, here we could have a problem with the swivel, which would show up as possibly high case drain. But if we got a high number here, maybe then we could move to some kind of a test like that. But if we get a low number here, and then we probably can eliminate the travel motor as having too much case drain. If there's barely any case drain flow up this line, well then there's no point going and looking at this procedure. So we're not really testing for a problem, we're testing to see if everything is good or okay. So there's our inline flow meter installed, and I've just oriented it so I can actually watch it from the cab while traveling. So I'm just watching my left track forward. Almost immeasurable amount of case drain flow coming through the flow meter. Left track reverse, similar. And that was in high speed. Sorry, that was in low speed. There's high speed. So you'll also notice there's a little burst of flow each time I switch from high speed to low speed, because the actuator piston that moves the swash plate is just sort of dumping some oil back out the case drain. But nothing alarming there for sure on that travel motor. I'm going to go around the other side, try the other one. Of course, this is not under load, but I'm just getting a baseline comparing left to right. So there's right forward, that's high speed, low speed, right reverse, low speed, high speed. Again, nothing particularly alarming there. Just going to operate the blade up and down while we're kind of looking at flow through the swivel, trying the blade function. So I'm just testing out my swivel here too, making sure that the blade isn't stalling. Now I don't know the order of the seals in the swivel. I don't know what's right next to the case drain port, but I haven't seen anything alarming. So my next step would be to try finding a very steep hill and getting this machine traveling up it, and trying to get the motors almost to stall, and then seeing what I get for K-string when they're under quite a high pressure load. So hopefully that gives you an idea of just a much easier way to check travel motor K-string, and it's a good way to check out your swivel as well if you're concerned that you might have oil bypassing inside the swivel, or all the swivel seals are having an issue. That's a good check to do off the start before you condemn the swivel, unless of course it's leaking externally. So this time and the previous time when we did have a travel power issue, this machine's traveling fine now, but at that time we found the same results as we're finding now. It wasn't in fact a travel motor issue at all. You're probably wondering what was causing travel power. What the issue was actually the seats where the main relief check valves go. So the power problem was kind of unique on that machine. When you use both tracks together, plenty of power. It would pull itself up a hill, no issue, forward or reverse. But if you tried to travel with one track at a time, then we had very little travel power. And if you tried to kind of rotate, then it would go okay. But one track, if you tried to do a pivot turn or just drive one track at a time, there was no power, and that's because the seats on the main relief check valve were bad. So when we had we're only using one spool for travel, only using one pump's flow, the bad seat on the check valve was allowing the oil to go down the open center of the other side of the valve, and vice versa. Both seats were bad, so we ended up trying to lap the valves into the seats with some valve lapping compound. That didn't work. We ended up buying new check valve poppets and springs and installing them, and it's been fine ever since.